Welcome to Refuting Rationality, the show where we refute the YouTube atheist Rationality Rules. In today's video, we'll be refuting the video where he tries to debunk the Kalam's argument. Let's just skip right to it.
The argument goes as follows. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause.
Well, that's a fine start. There are other ways of writing the Kalam's argument, but that is accurate enough. Although notice he highlighted universe. That's going to come into play later, but I'll cover that when it happens.
The first point to be raised, in my opinion, is that even if we accept the Kalam cosmological argument in its entirety, all it would prove is that there was a cause of the universe, and that's it. It doesn't even suggest, let alone prove, that this cause was a being.
Nor is it required to. The Kalam's argument is what's called circumstantial evidence. It's not meant to stand on its own. It's only meant to prove what is in the argument, which is the universe has a cause. Specifically a transcendent cause, but that is implied.
And it certainly doesn't suggest that this cause was a being that is eternal, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, personal and moral. That is one hell of a leap.
It's not that big of a leap. Frank Turek actually covers those things often. You can just search him on YouTube, you can find him. So I won't spend too much time on this one. But as for eternal, if you're going to exist before time exists, you're gonna be eternal. Just try explaining otherwise. Omnipotent should be pretty obvious. If you're creating all space, time, and matter out of nothing, you have to be omnipotent. As for omniscience and omnipresent, how could you create the universe and not be those? It just follows logically. And the other two he mentions, just leave to Frank Turek. Just search him on YouTube. Let's get to the next one.
A second problem that arises even if we accept the argument is that while it would prove that the universe had a cause, it wouldn't prove that this cause itself was without a cause. Or in other words, it wouldn't prove that a first cause existed, which for a first cause argument is pretty damn ridiculous. To be fair, the proponents of this argument do indeed offer additional arguments in the attempt to assert that the cause of the universe must be without a cause, but the point I'm trying to make here and now is that the Kalam cosmological argument, by itself, is pretty damn trivial.
How convenient of him not to mention the other arguments that support it. He mentions that there are some, but he doesn't say what they are. I would not call the origin of the universe a trivial matter, especially if you're arguing with an atheist who believes the universe is eternal. Then the Kalam most certainly points to God, even without the supporting arguments, though it may require different supporting arguments. Such is the nature of circumstantial evidence. But I suppose I'll give him this, that technically the Kalam argument doesn't say that the cause of the universe is also the first cause, but it's pretty hard to say otherwise.
In an effort not to bore you, let's now move on from the starter and get to the main meal, the logical flaws within the argument. One of the most critical flaws with this argument, and one that isn't always recognised, is that it commits a subtle but devastating equivocation fallacy. It does this because the argument switches between two different definitions of the universe throughout its premises in order to achieve its conclusion.
I also consider this the main meal of the argument, because this is where he really starts to blow it. First of all, he says the Kalam uses two different universes in its premises. It uses one universe in a single premise, and the other universe in the conclusion. And later you will see him actually use equivocation. The very same equivocating he's accusing the Kalam argument of doing, which, spoiler alert, it does not do.
During premise 2, the argument uses a scientific definition of the universe, that being all matter, space and time. But during premise 3, it uses a colloquial and/or theological definition of the universe, that being everything that exists, everything that has existed, and everything that will exist.
And I just noticed while editing this video that he thinks that the line that says, therefore, is a premise. Lines containing the word therefore are not premises, they are conclusions. The conclusion is, therefore, the universe had a cause. Perhaps this is why he's confused and thinks that they're equivocating. But no. Next, this colloquial use of universe is not true. Nobody would use that form of universe for this, because everything that exists would include God. So that's just silly. Self-defeating. Both the premise and the conclusion use the scientific term. All space, time, and matter. Which, by the way, space and time are pretty much the same thing. A true equivocation fallacy is pretty easy to recognize. Socrates was Greek. Greek is a language. Therefore, Socrates is a language. That's equivocation. It's obvious. Let's move on.
The key difference here being that when we say that the universe began to exist using the scientific definition of the universe, what we are saying is that all matter, and by extension all of space and time, began to exist in the way it does now. What we are not saying is that absolutely everything came into being from absolutely nothing. But when we say that the universe began to exist using the colloquial definition of the universe, we are indeed saying that absolutely everything came into being from absolutely nothing.
And now you can see the beginning of where he's starting to equivocate. He says all space and time as it appears now. But the argument isn't about a change in space, time, and matter. It's about the cause of space, time, and matter. And again, no one would use that colloquialism because everything would include God. And we do not include God in the statement because he is the first cause. You cannot include the first cause because you'd end up with a false premise. Probably get to that later. When he mentions special pleading, I'll get to it. Also, in this context, saying absolutely everything and absolutely nothing is kind of redundant.
And this brings us comfortably to another critical flaw with the Kalam cosmological argument. It asserts that something can indeed come from nothing, a concept in philosophy known as creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, when this has never been demonstrated to occur. In fact, to the contrary, everything we know about cause and effect overwhelmingly and unanimously tells us that when a new thing is created, it is due to the rearrangement of energy and matter that already existed. That is, everything is the result of creatio ex materia, creation out of material. The truth is that we have no evidence whatsoever to suggest that the universe, as defined by science, was created from absolutely nothing. And hence, the extraordinary claim that something can come from nothing requires extraordinary evidence. And yet the best response the proponents of this argument have offered so far is the assertion that absolutely everything began to exist at the Big Bang, which again simply isn't what the evidence suggests.
Now his problem with the Kalam argument is that it asserts that something can come from nothing. That's the point. And earlier he said it was trivial. Well, clearly he doesn't think it's trivial now, as he thinks the idea that something can come from nothing is so ridiculous. It's also rather surprising to hear him say this, since there are people like, what's his name? No, seriously, what's his name? I forgot his name. I think he wrote a book called A Universe from Nothing. I cannot remember his name. Oh well. Anyway, there are plenty of atheists who think that the universe could come from nothing, but without God. So if he really thought the Kalam argument was trivial, he should believe that same thing. But now it seems like he believes that all space-time and matter is eternal and uncreated or uncaused. And then of course there's that nonsense line of extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Well, guess what? If I told you my cat could talk, that would be an extraordinary claim. But showing you my talking cat, that would not be extraordinary evidence. That would be normal evidence. what would you even consider to be extraordinary evidence? Any evidence to an extraordinary claim would by definition be extraordinary evidence. So it's really a nonsense line. It's like saying soda requires carbonated water. Soda is carbonated water. That may not be the best analogy, but that's the one I got. I do not consider showing you my cat to be extraordinary evidence. If my cat talks, well, that's extraordinary. But the evidence itself is not. And again, who has he been debating where they say absolutely everything began at the Big Bang? First of all, there was no Big Bang, but that's neither here nor there. That's not really relevant. Exactly. Secondly, God is part of everything. You're not going to say God started at the Big Bang. You would need God for there to even be a Big Bang. And he says that's the best he's heard. That's sad.
Yet another defeating flaw that the proponents of this argument commit, but not a flaw that the argument itself commits, is a special pleading fallacy. As already stated, the Kalam cosmological argument by itself only asserts that the universe had a cause. But the proponents of this argument go a step further. They assert that the cause of the universe didn't begin to exist, and therefore it didn't have a cause, without adequately justifying why this cause is an exception. In general, these proponents argue that, because cause and effect cannot occur without matter, space and time, and because matter, space and time began to exist as a result of the Big Bang, then whatever came before the Big Bang could not have had a cause. But to state it for a last time, the claim that matter, space and time began to exist at the Big Bang is not substantiated. To quote Sean Carroll, a cosmologist who in my opinion is remarkably articulate on this subject, the correct thing to say about the Big Bang is not that there was no time before it, but rather that our current understanding of the laws of physics give out at that moment in time.
So now he's going to argue against the proponents of the argument rather than the argument itself. Well, that sounds like an ad hominem. So now he thinks God is an exception to the Kalam argument. Well, he's not. God did not have a cause, therefore he does not need an exemption. The argument states that anything that began to exist had a cause. That is the first premise. So no, it is not special pleading. God fits quite nicely in the Kalam argument. No special pleading required. But of course he's not trying to argue against the Kalam argument, is he? He's trying to ad hominem the people who argue against it, and not doing a very good job of it either. Lawrence Krauss, that was the guy's name. I realize this is a bit off topic all of a sudden, but that's when I finally remembered to record it. Also, speaking of stuff I forgot to record, you may have noticed that from the beginning of this video till later on, probably not very far on, that the audio quality changed, and that is because I changed rooms. And again, I have to wonder who this guy has been debating, where they say that the reason God has no cause is because he was before space, time, and matter. That is not a reason for him to not have a cause. That is just, what's the word? Inevitability. If you exist before time, you probably don't have a cause. I would never use that as an argument for why God does not have a cause. He doesn't have a cause because he's the first cause. That's the argument. Not just because he's timeless and eternal. Now he wants substantiation for all space-time and matter beginning at the Big Bang. That is pretty well substantiated by the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy, also the expansion of the universe. Just go over this quickly. Everything, all the usable energy in the universe is running out. There is a finite amount of energy in the universe. If the universe was eternal, there would have to be an infinite amount of energy. God has an infinite amount of energy, but the universe does not. Also, the expansion. The expansion rate is getting faster. not slower, so you can't do a slingshot effect. It's not going to suddenly collapse. It's going further and further, and it will continue to go further until God does something about it. So if there's only a limited amount of energy in the universe, then it had to start somewhere. It had to have a cause. And then he quotes a guy whose name I've already forgotten, where he says that there was no time before... No. The correct thing to say about the Big Bang is not that there was no time before it, but rather our current understanding of the law of physics gives out at that moment in time. First of all, that's begging the question. You just assume that there was time. Secondly, we know there wasn't time because space and time are the same thing, practically. If you study relativity, you'll know that affecting space affects time, and affecting time affects space. So they are linked inexorably. You cannot separate space and time. So if you have a beginning for space, you have a beginning for time, and vice versa. So yes, the correct thing to say is that there was no time before the beginning of the universe. There was no time before God created it.
And this leads us to the last flaw I'm going to point out in this video. And it's another flaw that isn't committed by the Kalam cosmological argument itself, but it is very frequently committed by the proponents of this argument. Beneath all the additional arguments and word salads, the proponents of this argument are essentially making an argument from ignorance. What it all really comes down to is the claim that since no scientific explanation can provide a causal account of the origin of the universe, the cause must be a very specific God. A God that, wouldn't you know, coincidentally is the one that the proponent believes in. That's right, it all comes down to the extremely satisfying "we don't know, therefore God."
Oh good, another ad hominem. First of all, I have to take issue with him calling it argument from ignorance, when the fallacy he's trying to do is the appeal to ignorance. Now I know different fallacies have different names. In other videos he uses the black and white fallacy, which I would call bifurcation fallacy. But I take a specific issue with this one, in that I would call an argument from ignorance to be where someone basically refutes themselves by saying they know something, but they don't know it. You'll often get this from atheists. For instance, if you ask an atheist, could you be wrong about everything you claim to know? If they say yes, they've just made an argument from ignorance, and everything they say after that is an argument from ignorance. Because they're saying they could be wrong about everything they claim to know, which means they don't know anything. Therefore, they are literally making arguments from ignorance. Secondly, this is not an appeal to ignorance. Again, he's got off topic. He's trying to refute the people rather than the argument that he claims to be debunking, but instead now he's just targeting the people who use it. But we do not use it out of ignorance. We do not say, we don't know, therefore God. As a presuppositional apologist, we say, we know, therefore God. And the atheist says, ultimately, we don't know, but not God. If you ask enough, how do you know this, how do you know this, how do you know this questions, the atheist will ultimately have to say, I don't know. Meanwhile, the Christian can say, God, and I know God. So at least in our worldview, knowledge is possible. But if you have to start with I don't know, then you don't know anything. So let's try and do a review here. First, he tries to accuse the Kalam argument of equivocation, even though it clearly does not. Both the premise and the conclusion use the same universe. All space, time, and matter. Next, he tries to say that the Kalam argument is trivial, but later claims its conclusion is impossible, which an impossible conclusion is by no means trivial. And then he ad hominems a little, trying to accuse the people who make the argument of special pleading and appeal to ignorance rather than the argument itself. So I hope you enjoyed this video, even if I don't think you did, because I am not an entertaining YouTuber, that's for sure. But hopefully I will have more videos coming out soon. We'll see. I don't know. This is my first, as you could probably tell.